Hello and welcome to the Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board's Supporting Young People with Vaping Dependency training. My name is Emma McGilvery and I'm a Senior Public Health Practitioner in the local public health team, and I will be doing the voiceover for this training today. This training should take approximately 2.5 hours to complete, and we would recommend that you complete this in a group setting. This training can also be completed by yourself. There will be opportunities to pause throughout the training for you to complete the activities. We would recommend these be done in a group setting, but they can be done on pen and paper. There are 4 main objectives that this training plans to address. Objective 1 is to increase your understanding of vaping and its health impacts on young people. Objective 2 is to increase your awareness and confidence of utilising vaping assessment tools and intervention strategies. Objective 3 is to understand referral pathways and specialist support that is available. And finally, Objective 4 is to develop skills for building a supportive, whole-setting approach to reducing vaping. We're going to start with section 1, which is about understanding vaping and its impacts, the vaping basics. This is a good opportunity for you to pause the video if you're in a group setting and have a chat with your colleagues or people around you about what they understand about vaping and its impacts and any experiences you have had of working with children and young people who vape. We're going to start really simply by talking about what is a vape. So a vape, the word, can be used as a noun, which is an electronic vaping device that is handheld and produces for inhalation an aerosol formed by heating an e-liquid using a battery-powered heating coil. The word vape can also be used as a verb or a doing word, so to inhale and exhale vapour produced by a device designed for this purpose. You may have heard other words for the word vape, which could be things like e-cigarette or ENDS device, but vape is now the increasingly preferred term by users and professionals across the industries. So what is vaping? So as I mentioned, vaping involves inhaling an aerosol or vapour which is produced by heating that liquid within an electronic device, an e-cigarette or a vape. This liquid, often called e-liquid or vape juice, typically contains nicotine, flavourings and other chemicals. It is possible to purchase nicotine-free vapes, but primarily what we see on the market are vapes that contain nicotine. This liquid contains 2 different types of oil. They are called PG and VG. And what you will notice is that in vapes that have higher levels of PG, they will produce more aerosol, more vapour, so they will produce a bigger cloud of smoke. The ones that we see commonly on the market nowadays tend to have a 50-50 balance of PG and VG, which is why we see only a moderate amount of vapour produced by them. So the big question that we always get asked is vaping harmful? And when thinking about vaping harms, it's helpful always to consider relative risk. So when you're communicating this, you communicate that for non-smokers, switching from breathing fresh air to inhaling vape aerosol actually raises their risk of harm and should be discouraged. However, for people who smoke, switching exclusively to vaping may reduce that level of harm. It's an important distinction to make when having conversations and discussing the effects of vaping with an individual. In the instance of children and young people who primarily are non-smokers, they are actually increasing their risk of harm by vaping. However, for an adult smoker or a pregnant smoker, switching exclusively to vaping may reduce the harm. The key line that we say is if you don't smoke, then you shouldn't vape. So where do vapes sit on the gradient of harm? So this diagram shows us a gradient of harm of all of the nicotine-based products that are currently on the market in the UK. So at the lower end of the spectrum, you've got medicinal nicotine. So these are nicotine replacement therapies such as patches, gums, lozenges, sprays. These are what we use within the Help Me Quit Stop Smoking services to help people quit smoking. They are tried, they are tested, and they've been around for a really long time, and we know that they deliver a clean form of nicotine. So we would say this is the safest option to use if somebody was looking to quit combustible tobacco. Next up, we have nicotine pouches, which contain nicotine among other ingredients for oral use. They kind of look like a little tea bag, which you would pop into your gum line. We know that with these, we are seeing some oral issues that come from this, so things like ulcers, gum disease. However, much like vapes, they haven't been around long enough for us to see the long-term effects of them, so we have placed them slightly higher on the gradient of harm compared to medicinal nicotine. Next up, we have vapes. So those are those battery-powered devices that heat a nicotine-containing solution. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we know that they are less harmful than smoking, but they are still causing a certain amount of harm to a person, especially if you've never smoked before. So they sit in sort of the middle of the gradient of harm, just before we get to the tobacco-based products. So the final three products are tobacco-based products. So that is smokeless tobacco, so that can be oral use tobacco, so things like chewing tobacco or snuff or dissolvable tobacco. So these, we don't tend to see them too much within younger generations anymore. However, they are still out there and they are still being used. So they sit on that lower end of the combustible tobacco section. And then we have heated tobacco products, often called heat not burn. So this is products that heat tobacco at a lower temperature than conventional cigarettes. The idea is that the tobacco within it is heated, it's not burnt, so it's not causing as much harm. They are still relatively high on the gradient of harm, only one below that combustible tobacco. So combustible tobacco is things like cigarettes, cigars, pipes, or shisha pipes, and we know that this is the single most harmful thing that you can do for your health. We still see a huge amount of preventable illnesses that come from smoking every year. There are three main types of vaping products that you may see on the market. So the first product is the disposable vape. So this includes a battery, an atomizer, which is the heating element, and a cartridge that is pre-filled with nicotine, and then there is a mouthpiece at the top. As of June 2025, these products are now illegal to be sold. You still may see some on the market, used by children and young people or used by adults. However, these devices are now illegal and should not be being sold by shops. Next up, you have the refillable e-vapor product. So this is primarily what we would advise people to use if they were using an e-cigarette to quit smoking. So this again contains electronics, so the battery, it's got a replaceable wick and coil, which is the atomizer, the heating element, and then it's got a refillable liquid formulation. And then on top of that is the mouthpiece. So these are rechargeable devices, so they're better for the environment. And because you are filling the liquid yourself, you can monitor the amount of nicotine that you are putting into the device. Now, nicotine liquids come in lots of different strengths. However, with the pod-based products, which is the last product on this diagram, you can only buy them in 20 milligram, 10 milligram, or 0 milligram. Whereas with the refillable e-vapor products, these ones you can change the nicotine strengths down in twos. So for somebody who is quitting smoking, this is the best product that they can use, because what they would be able to do is to start on a higher level of nicotine and gradually reduce that over time to quit. They can also use the pod-based products, so these are a simplified version of the rechargeable products. So these contain electronics and then a pod which attaches to the top. So this pod has the atomizer, the wick and coil within it. It has the liquid which is already pre-filled, and then it also has the mouthpiece on the top. And what they would do is they would pull the entire top piece off of these and replace this each time that they wanted to have a new cartridge put onto the vape.
We all know smoking is bad for your health. It causes disease and early death. Vaping can help adult smokers quit, but that doesn't mean that it's harmless. Most young people don't vape or smoke. And while vaping is less harmful than cigarettes, it doesn't have toxic tar or carbon monoxide. It can still cause coughing, headaches, dizziness, and sore throats. And on top of that, nicotine addiction. Vapes are highly addictive and nicotine hooks fast. Don't let it control you. And the long-term effects? No one knows yet. Selling vapes with nicotine to under 18s is illegal. So is buying them for someone younger. Anyone selling vapes to young people isn't looking out for you. They're only after your money. Don't get played. And what about the planet? They're packed with plastic and batteries that don't break down properly, polluting the soil and water. Vapes are to help smokers quit. Don't smoke, don't start vaping. Get the right support and quit for good. Want the facts? Scan the QR code and access reliable information and support.
Moving on to section 2 of our training. So we're going to have a look at the background of vaping amongst young people within Wales. So how many young people are currently using vaping devices? So the School Health Research Network, or SHRN for short, have been doing research with children within school settings around their vaping usage. So from the 2024 study, we found that 25.7% of learners from year 7 to 11 have ever tried a vape, and 15.9% of year 11s vape regularly compared with 0.8% of year 7s. So as they get older, we are seeing vape use increase. 7% of these secondary age learners use vapes regularly or at least weekly, and many more girls than boys are vaping. Next, we're going to talk about legislation around vaping. There are three main areas that we need to cover. Firstly, from Welsh Government, they have mandated that vapes and e-cigarettes are illegal for sale to anyone aged under 18 in Wales. There are also marketing restrictions on advertising to reduce the appeal to young people, and recently there has been a consultation which looks at point of sale, flavourings within vapes and designs on packages to change them to make them less appealing to young people. On the 20th of March 2024, the UK government announced the Tobacco and Vapes Bill in Parliament. If passed, this legislation will come in from the 1st of January 2027 and will make it an offence for anyone born on or after the 1st of January 2009 to be sold tobacco products. This will increase year on year, and the idea is that they are building a smoke-free generation. Under different legislation but under the same bill, disposable vapes have also been banned across the UK from the 1st of June 2025. Looking at regulatory bodies and illicit vaping, the regulatory body for vaping is MHRA, or the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, and they mandate what is legal to be sold for vapes across the UK. Illegal and illicit trading of vapes is still ongoing, however, and this is monitored by trading standards across CTM and enforced by trading standards and South Wales Police. If you come across any illegal or illicit trade of vapes and would like to report it to trading standards, I have included the email addresses for each local authority at the end of the presentation. There is also Public Health Wales, which is our national public health body, and they have sent a load of guidance around vaping and supporting children and young people who vape. Current guidance does not recommend vaping as a safe activity for young people, and they are focusing on preventing vaping initiation and dependency as public health priorities. There are a number of resources available from Public Health Wales, including a parents and carers leaflet and curriculum guidance, which are available at the end of the slides. I also just wanted to touch on how smoking interacts with vaping. So dual use of vapes and tobacco is increasing, although vape-only use has risen significantly. This slide is important because not only do we need to target vaping within children and young people, there is a need to maintain tobacco prevention messages. As I mentioned, smoking is one of the most harmful things that you can do for your health. So as much as vaping is a new trend, a new craze, we also need to continue sharing these tobacco prevention messages with young people and adults alike. So looking at supporting young people who vape in CTM, we had two main objectives from this training. And that is to be able to train people to provide accessible short-term support for young people who are experimenting or regularly vaping on a group or one-to-one basis, and to be able to enable people to be confident to signpost to specialist support for more complex needs. This specialist support pathway is still in development in the wider picture in Wales. However, what we have done is provide this training to school nurses and youth services across Cwm Taf Morgannwg for them to be able to provide the accessible short-term support in the interim. There have been some exciting developments from Public Health Wales, which I will talk about a little bit later on during the slides, for resources for children, young people and for adults who vape and wish to quit. This training can also be used by yourselves if you work in a setting which is children and young people facing. So please feel free to take any information in terms of the supporting and young people training that we deliver across this training package. There were some key features of the training that we wanted to highlight. So we wanted it to be focused on education and prevention. We are not here to be punitive, it doesn't work, and supporting children and young people by educating them and highlighting the need for prevention is a much better approach to getting people to quit vaping. We also wanted to be able to give people a way of assessing nicotine dependency and motivation to quit vaping so that they can use this within structured conversations with children and young people. We wanted to keep this short-term support tailored to the individual. So, for example, if somebody wasn't comfortable discussing their vaping in a group setting, it could be tailored to a one-to-one setting. Or, for example, if somebody wanted wider support and wanted to do it in a group setting, it can also be adapted for that. So this training provides a framework for tailored support, not a direct conversation. We also wanted people to be able to provide accurate information and answer frequently asked questions, and to use behaviour change techniques within their approach to this topic. We also wanted people to be able to signpost to those specialist support options, but also wider signposting. And as part of this training that we delivered, we also supported collection of data for future planning. So before we get into addressing why young people may vape, we have some key vaping messages that we have pulled from the Public Health Wales's information and guidance resource on vaping for secondary age learners within Wales. So vaping is 95% safer than smoking, but it is not harmless. So this key message here is than smoking. As I mentioned, if you don't smoke, you shouldn't vape. It's also illegal to sell nicotine-containing vaping devices to anyone under age 18 or for adults to buy them on behalf of under 18s. It's a common misconception that vaping reduces stress and anxiety. Nicotine creates an immediate sense of relaxation, but this feeling is temporary and is quickly replaced by increased anxiety, tension, cravings, and withdrawal symptoms. I will talk through in the next couple of slides about the nicotine dependency cycle, which will give you more insight into how this works. Vaping devices contain metals and plastic which are difficult to recycle and pollute the environment. The use of disposable vaping devices in products had increased substantially among young people because they were more easily accessible. We have seen a huge reduction in this since the ban came in June, but there are still some devices out there which contain these harmful metals and plastics for the environment. Vaping can lead to dependence on nicotine, and dependence on nicotine can negatively affect mental health and well-being and can be disruptive to life and learning. And vaping devices should not be used by children and young people. The key overarching method that I would like people to take away from this training is if you don't smoke, you shouldn't vape. So moving on to section 3, we're going to look at health impacts, dependency and addiction. So why do young people vape? So there's a couple of reasons that young people may vape, and some of these are quite similar to the reasons why young people may smoke. So this may be things like peer influence or to give it a try, social image and perceived stress reduction. However, now we have noticed with vaping there are a couple of additional reasons why young people may vape. So this could be the perceived lower health risks of vaping compared to cigarettes, which we know they are less harmful than smoking, but they are not harmless. So being able to communicate this to young people is really important. And the additional one is liking the flavours. A lot of young people have reported that the reason that they vape is because they like the flavour of the vapes. So why are we concerned about vaping amongst young people? A recent ASH study showed that 50% of 11 to 17-year-olds always use vaping products that contain nicotine. So as I mentioned, there are nicotine-free products that are available on the market. However, with most children and young people, we see that the products that they are using do contain nicotine. Nicotine use in adolescence can harm the parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, impulse control, and overall behaviour. To look at this more in depth, we'll take a look at the nicotine dependency cycle, or the vaping cycle. So this starts with hitting the vape, or taking a puff of the vape. So this is when they take a puff of the vape and that vape liquid is electronically heated within the device and is turned into an aerosol and into vapour to be inhaled by the user. A 100ml bottle of e-liquid contains as much nicotine as 3,600 milligrams, and that is up to 100 times more nicotine than a pack of cigarettes. So these vapes, they are containing a lot more nicotine than if a child or young person was smoking. However, I will caveat this by saying, and this is important, is that nicotine in itself is not harmful. Nicotine is the substance that is within cigarettes and within vapes that actually causes a person to be addicted. It is the other harmful chemicals that are found in cigarettes that make them so harmful for a person to use. Now, vapes contain a lot less chemicals than cigarettes. However, we don't know the long-term effects of these chemicals on the body, and we also know that the only thing you should be breathing is fresh air. So mindful that this section is talking about nicotine dependency in the cycle and that they are a lot more addictive, but that does not mean that they are a lot more harmful than smoking. So they've taken a puff of the vape and then that nicotine travels. So when they inhale it, the nicotine is carried by the lungs and attached to vapor droplets within the lungs. And from there, that nicotine travels to and communicates with the brain within 7 to 10 seconds. And that nicotine alters the frontal lobe. It interacts with it, and it's known as the reward center of the brain. So that releases a rush of dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a huge role in our ability to experience pleasure by communicating with other neurons throughout the body. So that quick reaction from the nicotine being puffed, taken to the brain and altering the frontal lobe gives a temporary sense of instant relief or instant pleasure for the user. And it is important to note that addiction is actually a form of learning as well. So this instant rush and this instant addiction that people get to this substance makes it easier for the youth to form these addictions because they have a keener brain for learning at that age. So this addiction is much easier to form within a child or young person than it is with an adult. So they've had this huge dopamine rush from puffing the vape, and then it moves on to the half-life. So this half-life is where the nicotine's reaction in the body peaks. So this generally peaks within 2 hours on average, but because of these higher nicotine levels in vapes, this can be a lot shorter within vapes. And this is when the invitation of the onset of withdrawal symptoms happens. So this can be feeling stressed, anxious, irritability, increased depression, nervousness, and this is the half-life and can arrive a lot sooner than 2 hours within frequent use as well. And these withdrawal symptoms, they're not pleasant. They make somebody feel rubbish. And what they want then is that dopamine rush again, that happy feeling, that sensation to make all of those withdrawal symptoms go away. And that's where the voice of addiction clicks in. And this voice of addiction can be this huge sort of voice or huge feeling to wanting to return to these feelings of relief and pleasure. And nicotine addiction will influence one to return to their reliable source of instant relief, even if it's not good for them. So we know that having that nicotine puff has made them feel good, they feel rubbish, and they want something to make them feel good again. This voice basically tells them to carry on vaping, and thus the cycle starts again. So they go back to hitting that vape and following this cycle. And in their mind, when they vape, they feel less stressed, they feel less anxious, they feel less irritable, they don't have as much depression, they're not nervous. So what they automatically associate is that vaping makes them feel good and takes away these symptoms. But actually what we would have a conversation with children and young people around is that actually they wouldn't have this feeling of this increased feeling of stress or this increased feeling of anxiousness or irritability if they weren't within this constant cycle of nicotine dependency. Actually, they can lower their feelings of stress, anxiousness, nervousness, depression by just stepping away from this cycle. And it may worsen for 2 sort of weeks or so while they're having these withdrawal symptoms. But once they have managed to break this habit and break this cycle, then they will find that these feelings or these withdrawal symptoms or these feelings within themselves will have dropped significantly. So let's move on to section 4, assessment and identification. Now we know why young people vape and how the nicotine dependency cycle works. How do we assess nicotine dependency for a child or young person? How addicted are they? And how do we identify if a child or young person may be vaping? There are multiple signs of nicotine dependency or vaping within children and young people. So we'll start with the physical signs. So you may notice that a young person may be persistently coughing or has throat irritation. They may have shortness of breath or increased respiratory issues. They may have a dry mouth and unusual thirst, or you may smell a scent of fruity or sweet vapours lingering on their clothing or their breath. You may also notice, especially in a classroom setting, increased restlessness, especially if they are unable to vape. There are also some mental changes which you may notice, so changes in mood, irritability, especially like I said, if they're unable to vape for extended periods of time. You may notice increased anxiety within them, and again, within school settings, difficulty concentrating. There are also behavioural things that you may notice. So they may have frequent breaks or requests to leave the class or the workspace. There may be concealment behaviours, for example, holding or hiding small devices or using hand gestures near the face. There may also be unexplained spending or presence of unfamiliar devices or pods within their bags or coats. And you may notice an increased tolerance with them. So if you know that they vape, needing to vape more frequently or with higher nicotine products to achieve the same effect that they initially had. So how do we assess nicotine once we know that a child or young person is vaping? So this is the 5-item Roswell N scale. So this is what we would primarily advise people to use within conversations to structure a conversation with a child or young person who is vaping and to walk them through the questions. So this includes things like asking if a child or young person vapes more frequently during the first few hours after waking or in the rest of the day. How soon after they wake up do they vape? Of all of the times that they vaped, which would they hate to give up? How many pods, cartridges, or refills do they typically use per week? And how often do they vape? And each one of these answers will give you a score. So these scores can then be used to guide the treatment recommendations. So if somebody is scoring on the low end, so 0 to 3, they may have a lower addiction to nicotine. If someone is scoring on the moderate scale of 4 to 7, they may have a moderate addiction. And if someone is scoring on the higher end of 8 to 10, they have a higher addiction to nicotine. Now, this scale, it can help to guide people to have conversations around vaping and what things to include. So, for example, if someone is on that higher end of nicotine dependency, they may need further support to be able to quit vaping. This means that they are highly addicted to the nicotine that is within the product. However, if someone is on the lower end of the scale, this just means that their nicotine addiction to the product is on the lower end. It still may be difficult for them to quit vaping because not only is the nicotine addiction at play, it's also the habitual side of things. So somebody may develop a habit around vaping, which are equally hard to break. So these two things together can make it really, really difficult for somebody to quit vaping. So this scale, although it gives you an idea of where they sit within nicotine addiction, it's still useful to talk through behavioural change techniques with them to help them break the habit side of vaping alongside. So before we get into using behavioural change techniques and having those structured conversations with children and young people around their vaping habits, we're going to talk about initial conversations and building rapport. Now, this is a section, if you work with children and young people, you are probably already pretty good at having initial conversations with people and building rapport. So we'll just brush over it quickly. So now you've had the opportunity to have a chat amongst yourselves or to write some ideas down of how you would build rapport if you're completing this training by yourself. Here are some ways that we have thought of that you can create a safe and welcoming environment to have conversations around vaping with children and young people. So to start, make sure that they are in a safe and welcoming environment. So if it's better to have a conversation with them alone, pull them to one side and have that safe environment for them. Or if you're addressing a group, make sure that you are in a situation that they are feeling comfortable and happy to talk to you. You can introduce the purpose of the conversation. So start by saying, oh, I've noticed you vape, or, how much are you vaping at the moment? Or I've seen you've got these devices, something like that. So introducing the purpose of the conversation and making sure that they are comfortable to continue the conversation with you. And to use open and non-judgmental language while you're doing that. Like I mentioned before, we're not here to punish children and young people for vaping. We're not taking a punitive approach. We want to educate them and we want to prevent them from starting or prevent them from continuing. So using open and non-judgmental language around vaping can be really helpful to getting them to open up about the problem. To be able to show empathy and understanding to them, we know that this is the way that we get people to relate to us by being able to empathise with what they're going through and understand with what they're going through. We're not judging them. We're not there to tell them off for doing it. We're there to understand why they are currently doing it and support them to quit if they would like to. And then also to encourage self-identified goals. So it's really important that the person who is vaping wants to change, wants to be able to quit, wants to be able to reduce, whatever it is that they want to be able to do. So to be able to encourage them to self-identify that those goals that they want to complete means they are more likely to complete them. Unfortunately, we cannot force any child or young person to stop vaping if they don't want to. So the key thing is being able to educate them about the risks and everything we've talked about so far, and then to be able to support them to complete their self-identified goals. So once you've done this and you've had the initial conversation with somebody, we're going to talk a little bit now about section 6, which is supporting behaviour change. So some of you may have seen this model before, some of you may have never seen this before in your life. So this is the COM-B model, which is one of the key behavioural models that we use in public health and across systems to be able to change a person's behaviour. So what this model shows is that if a person has the capability, motivation and opportunity to change a behaviour, they will be able to change it. And if one of these things is taken away, the person will not be able to change the behaviour. So in the example of vaping, the behaviour that we want to change is that we want to stop people from vaping, okay, or stop a child and young person from vaping. So they have to have the capability to be able to do this. Do they have access to support? Do they have an option to quit in a safe environment? And then motivation. Are they motivated to do so? Have you given them the correct information to be able to support them? Are they motivated? Do they want to do it? And then finally, opportunity. Do they have a safe space where they can communicate with somebody around their vaping and be able to work through self-identified goals to be able to get them to quit? If a person has all three of these, they have the capability, they have the motivation, and they have the opportunity, then they will be able to change that behaviour. So now we come to our first activity. And if you're working in a group setting, I would advise working in groups of 4 or more. If you're working by yourself, you can take the opportunity to take a pen and paper and note down some ideas. You're going to take 5 minutes now to pause the video and have 2 minutes to note down as many things as you can which would increase a young person's capability, opportunity and motivation to vape. So what are the reasons that they may start vaping? If you're in a group setting, you can do this as a competition, and the group with the most at the end of 2 minutes wins. Take the opportunity afterwards to feed back amongst other groups as to what you've written down, and you may find some new ideas across the groups. So now we've had a little time to think about the addiction cycle and why children and young people may be vaping and what behaviours could potentially underlie their vaping habits. Let's have a look at how we apply that practically. So we're going to use a framework which is from the Making Every Contact Count training, which some of you may be familiar with, called the 3 A's framework. And this section is how you have these conversations with children and young people initially, and then also what strategies you can bring in using that nicotine dependency scale that we talked about earlier. So the 3 A's framework is a very simple framework that follows the 3 A's: ask, advise and act. So initially you would ask the child or young person about their vape use and potentially dual use of other products. So for example, if they are also smoking tobacco or using cannabis, and you would assess their nicotine dependency using that Roswell N scale. You would then record the status somewhere and identify the needs of the individual to tailor a support plan for them. So you're thinking about that COM-B model, those capabilities, opportunities and motivations. Why does that person vape, and how do we tailor our support and our support plan to be able to support their quit attempt? Next, you would then advise the individual. So you would advise the individual to quit vaping and the dual use of the other products they may be using, and you would discuss some of the harms of continued use that we've talked about. You would then provide some benefits of quitting. So it may be if the child or young person reports that they are struggling with anxiety and they feel that vaping helps them. Some of the benefits of quitting could be talking them through that nicotine dependency cycle we went through, and to be able to show them that actually they would be able to reduce their anxiety by quitting vaping. And then you would provide the information on the most effective methods to quit and manage nicotine withdrawals. And some of these strategies we will go through in a little bit later on in the slides. You would then act. So you would then help to either make a referral to another appropriate service, so that may be the Help Me Quit service if you feel that they need more structured advice, and you would encourage the use of behavioural strategies, which we will talk through in a minute, and provide follow-up with them. If this is something that you're going to continue to support a child or young person with within your setting, providing follow-up is a really, really important part of this behavioural change. So it may just be organising a checkup with them within a week to see how they're getting on with their self-identified goal. So if that is to reduce, to see if they've managed to do that, or if that is to quit entirely, to see if they've managed to do that, and to continue providing that follow-up with them. It's really important to check in with a child or young person with their self-identified goals. Although they have set those goals themselves, it's great to have that support available from yourselves to be able to check in and monitor their progress and see how they're getting on. So let's talk about these 3 steps in a little bit more detail. So starting with the ask section. You would ask some screening questions to determine their e-cigarette use. That may be something like asking simply, do you vape? And finding out about other products, so do you use any other products containing tobacco like cigarettes or shisha or cannabis? Or if you want to go into a little bit more depth with them, in the last month, how many times have you vaped? If you're really struggling to initiate this conversation, you can try an open-ended question with them. So things like, some people use vapes to manage their stress. What has your experience been of this? Or you can ask questions around, what do you most like about vaping? Or what do you dislike about vaping? You can then ask screening questions to determine their dependence and understand their nicotine withdrawal symptoms. So you can screen for that nicotine dependence using the 5-item Roswell N scale, and you can ask things about what brand they're vaping, what type of things that they're vaping, whether that's a rechargeable, a refillable, a disposable, what flavours they're using, if their vapes contain THC, and just understanding if there's anything else going on wider in terms of nicotine withdrawal symptoms. Have you tried to stop vaping before? If so, what did you experience? You can then ask about the immediate needs of the individual. So you can talk about managing these nicotine withdrawal symptoms, reassuring them that they are something that is short term and they will pass and they will feel better after they have quit the cycle. You can determine and agree with a young person what their immediate priorities are. So that may be that they just want to cut down. It may be that they want to quit entirely. So just helping them to identify those self-identified goals. And then you can also support long-term cessation with them. So you can have a conversation with them if they say perhaps, oh, well, I actually don't want to quit entirely at the moment, I just want to reduce. You should encourage this, but then also say perhaps, this is the goal that we aim for now in the interim, but let's have a look at what we can do on a longer-term scale to make sure that you are quit for good. On this slide, I've popped some key questions that you can ask about vaping habits to make sure that the conversation with them flows smoothly and you can get all the information that you need to be able to support them. So you can ask them what they like about vaping or what are the not so good things about vaping. You can ask them what might make it tricky for them to reach a goal of quitting or reducing. You can ask them, on a scale of 1 to 5, how worried are you about your vaping? And if somebody responds with a 3, you can ask them, why not a 2, and structure the conversation that way. You can ask them from a financial perspective, so how much they're spending on vaping and what else they could do with this money. Money is often a really good motivator for getting people to quit vaping or smoking. So just getting them to write down and understand how much they're actually spending on vaping and an alternative they could use that money for is a really good motivator for getting people to quit. And most importantly, you can ask them what their next steps will be. So what is their plan? What are they going to do going forward? And then as an individual, you can say to them, well, I can support you in this way to do those next steps. So then we move on to the advice section. So you're going to advise the young person to quit vaping. You're going to ask permission to advise about the harms and risks of vaping. Sometimes people just don't want to talk about it and they don't want to quit and they want to take a I'm not even going to acknowledge that I'm doing this stance with these things. So making sure that you have the consent of the young person to talk through those things is really important. And then in a non-judgmental way, you can advise the person to quit vaping and inform them of the most effective ways to do so. So you can say something like, one of the best things you can do for your health is to quit vaping. I can help you with this. You would then advise on the harms and risks associated with vaping and the benefits of quitting. So ask the young person, would you like me to give you some information about vaping? And if they say yes, some examples of harms you can discuss could include things like most vapes contain nicotine, which is highly addictive and can harm your brain development. And you can note there that the brain continues to develop up until the age of 25. So if it is a child or young person you're speaking with, this can really have an impact on the development of their brain. You can also say things like vaping can really impact your mental and physical health, and many of the long-term effects are not yet known. This is a really tricky conversation to have around this, because I think most practitioners or most people working in the space want to be able to say, well, this is really bad, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. However, we can only be honest about the long-term health effects of vaping and that we don't know them, and I think that in itself is quite scary. You can then discuss behavioural strategies. So we'll talk a little bit more in detail about these in the next couple of slides. But you can discuss what sort of barriers and opportunities for cessation the young person may experience. You can ask them what challenges they feel there might be for quitting and what are some good reasons to quit. And then you can discuss suitable behavioural strategies. So let's talk a bit more through those. So here are the behavioural strategies which you can use to support the young person to achieve their goal. So strategy 1 is an alternative dopamine reward. So this strategy is based on the dopamine release as the reward. So as we mentioned, when they puff that vape, they get an instant dopamine release, and that is a pleasurable experience for them. So it's that feel-good chemical that's released in the brain. And research has shown that nicotine increases the level of dopamine in the brain. So that increase in dopamine means that that feel-good chemical is a hard one to match. So instead of using a vape, you could suggest something like the young person should carry a snack with them. And we would recommend using something like nuts or sugar-free gum, and that can give them a small dopamine release that they can use as an alternative to that vaping dopamine release. And then the next strategy is to get them to think of themselves as somebody who does not vape. So this strategy is based on motivational interviewing, which some of you may have heard of before. So the young person can imagine themselves as somebody who does not vape. So to exercise this strategy, get them to say to themselves, I am not a vapor, I don't vape, I don't smoke. And this can also include using sort of imagined scenarios, so you can get the young person to imagine an example of being offered a vape and role-playing what their response would be in this scenario. And then strategy 3 is the stray cat metaphor. So this strategy uses a metaphor that the craving is like a stray cat. If you feed the cat, it will keep coming back. And if you don't feed it, the cat will go away. So this idea of that, if somebody does stop vaping, they are not going to have those cravings after an extended period of time. However, if they continue to vape, they're going to continue to have those cravings for a vape. So to use this in practice, you could ask the young person to mindfully rehearse the metaphor when they have no cravings, and imagine using the image of the cat when the craving begins. So if the craving begins, they picture that cat and they think, if I feed this cat, it's going to keep coming back to me. So strategy 4 is distraction. So you can suggest that the young person distract themselves by doing something else, for example, playing a video game, going for a walk, looking at Instagram or Snapchat, or listening to music. And you can ask them to practice this by mindfully rehearsing a simple distraction visualization when there's no craving. So having a think about what they could do when that craving arises and how could they distract themselves from that craving. What sort of things work for them? Secondly, then, you could also use rewards or incentives. So you could suggest the young person set a measurable goal to reduce or stop their e-cigarette use using positive reinforcement for periods of abstinence. So, for example, if a child or young person's parents are aware that they vape, or they're happy for you to involve the parent or caregiver, they could agree to provide a reward to the young person for not using an e-cigarette for a week or another agreed time. If the child or young person isn't happy for the parent or caregiver to be involved, or the parent or caregiver isn't aware that they vape, you can support the young person to identify a reward that they can give themselves for an agreed period of absence. So, for example, if they have saved £5 from not purchasing a vape that week, they could use that £5 to go and purchase something else to reward or incentivize them to stop. And then finally, you can get the young person to agree to make a promise. So studies have shown that when people make a promise, they are more likely to comply to that promise. So for yourself as the professional or the healthcare worker, you can ask the young person to make a promise to yourself and to themselves for doing one or more of these behavioural strategies within this guide, or you could ask them to make a promise not to use their vape at specific times within the day or for a number of days. And getting them to commit and make that promise can make a huge change to how they view their vaping addiction. And finally, that brings us on to the third section of the framework, which is to act. So as the professional, you can refer to other cessation services or wider services. So if a young person is vaping, they can have a one-off behavioural session with Help Me Quit. And if they are smoking, they can be referred to Help Me Quit for full support. This is applicable to anybody aged 12 and up. And then depending on the circumstances, for example, if the young person is dual using vapes and other drugs, you can refer people on to more specialised services such as DAN 24/7 or Barod, or for example, if they are struggling with their mental health alongside it, there are other services like CAMS or Mind that you can refer the child or young person onto. So really using those signposting links to make sure that they have that whole rounded support around them for their quit attempt. You can arrange follow-up calls or appointments, so you can offer that ongoing support. As I mentioned, it's really important to sort of continue offering that support for somebody that is making a quit attempt or a reduction attempt. And you can arrange follow-up appointments with them to review their progress and to motivate the young person to continue that quit attempt. And if required, you can acknowledge that slip-ups are expected with quits. We see it a lot in the world of quitting smoking, and it is very, very similar in the world of vaping. You should not discourage or penalise a young person for slipping up when they are trying to make a quit attempt. You should just support the young person to recommit to their goals and try again, and reassure them that slip-ups are a thing and they do happen. You can then provide informational resources. So we have a really large communications pack that we have had developed for children and young people, which I will talk a little bit more about later on in the slides, so you could refer them to this. We also have our Help Me Quit resources or our Help Me Quit service, which you can contact to get wider resources. Or if you are referring on to a wider signposting partner, then you can use their resources to share with them. We have now come to our second activity. So for this activity, I want you to take the opportunity to pause the video. And if you're in a group setting, I want you to work in pairs. One of you will be the professional and one will be the young person. I want you to follow the 3 A's framework and hold a structured conversation. There is a resource available on the Padlet for you to download to support you to have this 3 A's conversation. I want you to take 15 minutes to complete this and to think about the scenario, I vape to manage stress from exams and social anxiety. I'm curious about cutting back but feel unsure if I can. So take 15 minutes to discuss this within your pairs. If you're completing this training by yourself, you may want to take this 15 minutes to sit down with a pen and paper and note down how you may have this conversation with somebody about using the 3 A's framework and holding a structured conversation. Now you've had a chance to complete this activity, I'd like you to have a think about what felt most challenging about the role play for you. How did it feel using the 3 A's framework? What strategies might you use to build confidence in real-life consultations? And how can applying these skills improve the way young people engage with support services? I'd take this opportunity to pause this video again and have a conversation amongst yourselves to feedback about how completing this activity felt. Next, we're going to talk about referral and integrated support. So how do you refer people on who need further support to quit or stop vaping? So let's talk about understanding referral pathways. Firstly, you need to identify the referral needs of the individual. So you need to recognise when additional support is necessary. For example, in the case of somebody who is vaping and smoking, they can then be referred to Help Me Quit. You also need to have a think about if you have already tried in-house support and it has not worked and the individual who may need further support, you can also then refer these people on to further services. There is a coordination with community resources, so to have a map out and think about other services which may be available for broader support, which could include mental health services or social services. We also commit to following the No Wrong Door policy, which is a Wales-wide commitment that any service is a valid entry point for further support, ensuring referrals are quick and easy for young people. And finally, you can make a referral to Help Me Quit, the Stop Smoking service. If a young person is vaping and smoking, they are eligible for 7 weeks behavioural support and up to 12 weeks free nicotine replacement therapy to help them to quit. If a young person is only vaping, Help Me Quit can currently offer a one-off behavioural support session in addition to the behavioural intervention that you undertake with them. Nicotine replacement therapy is currently not available for Help Me Quit for vape-only users. As a professional, you can submit a referral form to the link on screen, or you can self-refer an individual using the number or submitting your details to the link on screen. Public Health Wales and Help Me Quit nationally have announced a new resource called Your Quit Plan. Your Quit Plan is an online self-help tool developed by Public Health Wales that offers a personalised quit plan for tobacco and vape users. The tool aims to boost self-guided quit attempts alongside supporting harm reduction for vape use, particularly for those smokers or vapers who prefer online support and are not ready to engage with in-person Help Me Quit services. So for the example of a child or young person, this can be a really useful resource for them to help themselves build a quit plan for them vaping. You can either get the child or young person to complete this individually online if they wanted to, or you can use this tool within your conversations to have a structured conversation about building a self-identified goal for the child or young person to quit. I've put on screen a short video which shows the Your Quit Plan page. From there, a person can identify whether they are a smoker or a vapor. They can choose whether they want to quit entirely or reduce and set a quit date if they choose to quit entirely. They can then use the Roswell N scale, which is built into the web page, to assess their nicotine dependence and identify how much they're currently spending on vaping and or smoking. They can then identify some personalised reasons of why they want to quit and input these into the website. Next, it will ask them to identify their triggers. So this can be emotional reasons such as feeling anxious or feeling stressed. It also has habitual things on there, so any times within the day that they may smoke or vape more. It has some social reasons on there, so for example, if they're outdoors going to a social event or being with someone else who vapes, and then also helps them identify which nicotine withdrawal they have. They have a section which is about preparing to fight cravings, so understanding why they vape, and then also choosing their quit route, so whether they want to quit vaping over time or quit vaping in one go. They then have an opportunity to build their support network, so popping in whether they want to share that with any friends or family, and then it will also take them to a page then which summarises everything they've put in and gives them a quit plan to help them quit for good. There is a QR code on the screen which you can scan to take you to this web page, but I have also included the link on there to share with children and young people or to guide them through with children and young people for you to use within these structured conversations. Moving on to section 9, I just briefly wanted to talk about building a supportive environment for children and young people who want to quit or reduce vaping. On this page are some ideas that you can implement within your setting to build a supportive environment. You can encourage peer support, so to encourage positive peer influence and involvement in quit efforts. And this could be including providing group sessions if you have a large amount of children or young people who vape, or buddy systems for shared support among young people. You can also host education settings and to encourage engagement in these. So these can be information sessions for parents, for teachers, or for community members, or for children and young people themselves to understand vaping risks and cessation support. It's important that you share consistent messaging around vaping. School and community staff should share consistent, supportive messages about quitting and also use non-judgmental and encouraging language when discussing vaping cessation. You can also include the family if applicable. You can guide families on how to provide encouragement without pressure, and you can also offer tips on positive reinforcement and maintaining open communication. There is a parents and carers leaflet that is available that you can offer to parents and carers if they have a child or young person who is vaping, and it will help support them to provide support in the home for the child or young person to quit. I wanted to share our Want the Facts comms campaign. This is a huge comms campaign that has been developed by the local public health team within Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board. There are lots of resources that are available, and we have 2 Padlets that you can access. The first Padlet is for direct access by children and young people. This includes a video on vaping, which you watched previously in the slides, also information on how a child or young person can get help. It's got some information on there and FAQ sheets and some social media assets around what vaping can do to them, how they manage stress, and if they need to come back to somebody offering them a vape. We also have a second Padlet available, which is the Children and Young People's Vaping Resources Professionals page. And on this page you will find all of the resources that are available, including a social media schedule that you can use to share any of our interactive social media posts. You will find the video which you watched earlier within these slides. You will also find posters, mirror stickers and FAQs that can be used within settings. You will also find the support pathway, any information about public health resources, and any further web page links. This page is the main hub for any information about vaping, and you will find any updated resources or updated communications about vaping from Welsh Government and from Public Health Wales on this page. These resources are also available as paper copies. If you wish to have any paper copies sent out to your site, please send an email to my email address at the end of the slides, and I can arrange for these to be sent out for your setting. Now, as we come to the end of the training, I'd like to invite you to pause the video for one last time. I want you to think about using your newly acquired skills, and I want you to think about what barriers you may face when implementing these. Once you've got these noted down, I'd like to have a little think about what strategies you have for dealing with these barriers within your settings. On this page, I have included some additional courses and further reading. There are 2 additional courses which you can take which are relevant to this training, which is the Making Every Contact Count training, or MEC training, and I've included the email address on there, which is a training around having structured conversations around health issues. There is also the Motivational Interviewing training, and that is conducted by Rachel Hewitt. The email address for Rachel is on this page, so please feel free to contact her if you'd like to undertake this training. I've also included some links for further reading, so this includes things like the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, the page of Ash Wales, our local public health team pages, and some of the Public Health Wales resources that we have discussed. I've also included NCSCT courses, which is the National Centre for Smoking Cessation Training, and on here there are some further training courses which are around vaping. What I will caveat this with saying is that NCSCT are an English-based company, and the courses around vaping are often talking about prescription of vapes to people who smoke. In Wales, we do not currently provide vapes for prescription. I've also included the trading standards emails, so if you do have any illegal or illicit trade that you would like to report, there are the 3 local authorities areas that you can report to. And finally, if you have any questions that you would like answered about vaping or anything that this training has included, or any further support for implementing this within your settings, please feel free to email me on emma.mcgilvery@wales.nhs.uk at any point. You can also pop me an email if you would like to receive hard copies of the comms campaign to use within your setting. Thank you for taking the time to complete this training. I hope it's been useful, and if you have any further queries, please don't hesitate to get in touch.